We cannot predicate all of our decision-making for race 2 on what we saw in race 1. They're very different tracks.
Sainz thinks he wants to be the number 1, and we've seen that play out last year within a course of a race. So, like, team orders does not exist as a question with Max and Checo.
Like, if the Ferrari doesn't blow up on Leclerc, then Alonso's not on the podium. And what are we talking about right here? He's definitely not 10-1.
And we're back because F1 is back. We're going to Saudi Arabia. That's Joe Fortenbaugh. I'm Dalen. Well, we're not going there personally, but we're going to give you some bets and some plays to hopefully make you some money there, and also take a look at the futures market, how that shifted drastically pre-testing, post-testing, post-Bahrain. Just that whole market is very unique, very, let's say a lot of turmoil took place there when Max Verstappen and Red Bull dominated. But before that, Joe, how are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing quite well. It's fascinating that in a sport like this, you could have a race every week like you get on occasion. You can have a couple weeks in between. Literally right before we're going live here, we are hit with the Leclerc news. We're hit with the Haas news. It's like this isn't the NFL with Aaron Rodgers where stuff's going to break every day, but yet here we are, chock full of news to break down as we work through some of these odds. Excited for this race this weekend, though.
Yes, the 10-spot grid penalty for Leclerc for using, having another power unit already. I mean, after the debacle that took place, I didn't say debacle. Debacle is usually when things you don't expect. There was some level of expectation there that Ferrari could have the same problems they did last year, and that kind of manifested itself as he was in the contention for a podium, and then power unit craps out. So
this is an interesting situation coming in because, like you said, last year you had all those reliability issues. This year we were led to believe Fred Vasseurs taking over. There's not going to be a dramatic improvement in 1 year, but you thought there'd be some improvement. And then we saw what happened in Bahrain, right? Sainz was okay, but Leclerc fails and he's out of the race. So now we're turning our attention to a completely different race in Saudi Arabia, right? Fastest street course that we're going to see all year. And this is where the Ferrari performed well last year. The Ferrari's set up to perform well this season. And now you've got Leclerc taking a 10-spot grid penalty. I'll tell you what, my mindset coming into this race, I think recency bias is something we can take advantage of. The mindset for almost everyone, casual fans coming into Saudi Arabia, Red Bull's going to dominate, Max is going to dominate, Mercedes has issues, Ferrari's got issues, McLaren's in the tank, Alonso's red hot. I wouldn't overdo it with that. I would look to play some contrarian angles with some of that because these are two very different tracks. What we saw in Bahrain, it tests traction, it tests rear tires, right? This is a very different course that's going to be much more punishing for the rookies as well, and we'll get to that later. So I might be a little bit more bullish on Ferrari than some people are heading into the weekend. Okay,
let's get into that then, because Max is minus 225 to win at Jeddah. Sergio Perez at 6-1, he's second favorite. Alonso at 9-1, and you look at Leclerc still, I believe, like plus 330. Hamilton and most Mercedes, Hamilton and Russell plus 330, plus 350 respectively. Carlos Sainz plus 225. Those are kind of the main contenders there. How would you play this from that standpoint with Max being that massive a favorite to win? Are you even wasting money on that? Or are you looking at podium finishes, top sixes? What are you looking at?
I don't think I'm going to play Max to win. It's not going to surprise me if that happens, but we're really starting to move to a point where it's just assumed. Like, he's minus 225 here. 2 weeks ago, going into Bahrain, he was somewhere around minus 120. Then qualification happens. He tests, he wins pole. He's in a great position. The odds start to move to minus 200. Now we're just opening at minus 220 before we even get to the pole. And again, different course. So it's not to say I wouldn't bet him. I just don't see any value there. As I'm looking further down, it's tough to want to get behind Leclerc because he's going to face the 10-grid penalty. But Carlos Sainz is 16-1. 16-1 to win this race. And just to hit the podium, he's plus 225. I'm looking at that. Sainz didn't run as well as we thought he would in Bahrain. But again, this course, this track sets up way better for the Ferrari than Bahrain did. And if we get these prices now and Sainz goes out and does really well in qualification, we're going to end up beating the market here. So he's one racer I'm definitely keeping an eye on because, like I said, I'm going to be more bullish on Ferrari coming in. I think a lot of people are checking out on them because of everything that's happened, and the car sets up well for this circuit.
Yeah, some of those odds I was ripping through, those are podium finishes because that was my thing is like, I'm not... Betting the winner to me makes no sense. The value in that, I just don't see. I have not been proven yet that it's going to be Max, other than Max or Checo, or just Max, period. So I'm not messing with that, especially pre-qualification. I do think Sainz is very interesting at plus 225, to your point. I think I'm out on the Mercedes. I know they're both they're going to have some small upgrades. We may see something different. Well, let's see the qualification. And if they qualify well and it looks at all different, then maybe I change my POV. But for right now, the only thing I think of interest and of value is Sainz on the podium in terms of that bet. The other part that I think is interesting is Red Bull. You think it's a double podium finish was minus 150. So again, not a lot of value. You're getting some juice, and you need 2 of the 3 spots on the podium. Now, last week that was plus 110. That was one of my favorite plays, and that paid out. You were really investing in that, but there was partially because of the value there. Here you lose that. You're playing a lot of juice here. Would it make sense to do that, or explain us to the odds in terms of, because you can do different things in terms of what you want to do from the qualification standpoint? It's minus 150 for a double for Red Bull to take quali. If you do Max for the quali, it's plus 115. If you do Sergio on his own, it's 5-1. Explain the difference there, because it seems like there's way more value just betting them both individually than having the minus 150 for the collective Red Bull takes qualification.
Right. So, I mean, the Red Bull's the best car from what we've seen. And if they qualify well and they get out in front, it could be what we saw in Bahrain. You can get this big lead. You can cruise. They didn't even have to push the car all that much late. They were actually running quite a conservative race with Max because there was no reason to take any extra chances given how well they were performing. So over the course of a longer race, you're obviously going to have to lay a greater price because you've got the better car. Qualification has a little bit more variance, but if you're of the belief that Red Bull's going to come into this weekend and dominate like they have, Verstappen at plus 115 to win pole, or Checo at 5-1 to win pole, I would take shots there. I would take shots there because if you get that, you're going to get terrible prices on them to win once we actually get to the race. You know, the one thing you have to keep in mind is that Ferrari qualified very well here last year, and again, the car sets up nicely. As bad as the situation is for Charles Leclerc with the 10 grid penalty, he's still, I believe it's in the neighborhood of plus 110 to get the podium. They're going to adjust that. But for quali, he's plus 190. Plus 190. So he's right there. So the odds makers are telling us they believe the Ferrari isn't as great as the Red Bull, but it's there. They think Leclerc can out-qualify Perez. So the car's going to be running a lot closer. So if I'm taking any shots with Red Bull, I'd be doing that. I'd be playing them in qualification and seeing what happens there.
In terms of Fernando Alonso, to your point, he's minus 140 for the podium. You're taking some pretty big juice there. And Carlos Sainz is plus 225. So you've identified that variance is Sainz is where some of the value is. And as you said before, Leclerc is 110 plus 110. So yeah, if you believe in the Ferrari, then your bet is not Leclerc with a 10 spot grid penalty. It is Sainz, in my opinion, and I think yours as well. This is a weird one, but you just mentioned McLaren, and you can bet in some of the props, first team to retire. AlphaTauri is plus 500 and McLaren's plus 700. I mean, is it the ultimate fade move? Would you dabble with as what the problems that both those teams had at the past race? Would you dabble in either one of those bets?
So McLaren was an absolute disaster. And like I said, it's going to get better for them because they feel they're on the right track. I don't know if it happens here. I think the angle you'd be playing for first to retire is to fade one of the 3 rookies. And Piastri is racing for McLaren. So between him, De Vries, and Logan Sargent, those would be the guys. This is a very daunting test. The rookies performed relatively well. I mean, I know Piastri had car issues, but they performed relatively well to expectation at Bahrain. But you have to remember, they had testing at Bahrain. They've had work as previous, drivers prior to Formula One at Bahrain. They're familiar with the course. Saudi Arabia, I'm not sure, one of the 3 of them, I don't have it listed right now. Nick De Vries has never even raced here. He's never raced here. This is a much more punishing course for rookies. There's a lot of additional challenge and risk versus what they faced 2 weeks ago. So if you're looking for the first retirement, I would be looking to fade one of the 3 rookies. I think that's where it's going to end up being.
Okay, I mean, I agree with you on that one. You'd expect it to be better, but it was pretty terrible for McLaren on the way out. You mentioned having Piastri there, which is interesting for him because he had a lot of pressure coming in. But with the car being this bad, I feel like the pressure is off him because it's like, hey, if I stink, the car stinks. Like, what do you want me to do? But that doesn't mean that he's going to make it to the end of the race. Like that, there still could be a lot of other issues there. I know you went on some head-to-heads. Which one are you focused on right now in terms of a head-to-head? Which was, as you mentioned before, we did the first race. These are a real fun way to watch the race. And I went Yuki against Zhao Guanyu, and then that was a fun battle to watch. That Yuki ended up winning, and that was It's just a different way to do it, but I love the head-to-heads. What do you like this week?
So the head-to-heads are awesome. That's my favorite thing. The only problem from the gambling perspective is it's not like the NFL or college football where we have a whole week to bet them. After qualification happens, you get the prices and you have less than a day to bet into them. So that's when you're going to get your odds. Now, before the season started, we talked about season-long head-to-heads where Yuki Tsunoda was an underdog against his teammate. Like that to me, going up against Nick DeVries, for him to be the underdog in year 3, where you know he's got to perform if he wants to keep the seat, I thought there was value there. So we talked about that, and boom, after the first race, you're seeing Tsunoda perform at a higher level. Now, he didn't score any points there, but we're close. We're close on that one, and they've since readjusted him from plus 110 to minus 200. That's something to keep an eye on. I think the most fascinating one out there, because so many of these prices are just such large straddles. Verstappen's a huge favorite over Checo. Leclerc's a big favorite over Sainz. That's what you end up seeing. What do you do with Alpine? Because Ocon had a terrible race out of the gate, but he's familiar with the team in the car. What was it? 3 penalties. Gasly's new, but Gasly goes from 20th into the top 10 and scores points. Gasly's now minus 140 on the season to rack up more points than Esteban Ocon. I almost feel like there's value now going back to Ocon if he can get himself organized and we chalk it up to just one bad race.
It's interesting, and that's the thing. There is obviously the market's going to move with one race, but we have seen some pretty large pendulum swings in different things pretty quickly with only one data point in a 23 race calendar. We talked about the podium, we talked about the winner, we just went some head-to-heads. Top 10 finish though. Where do you see value in that?
So the first name that came to mind was Valtteri Bottas. I thought he drove fantastic in Bahrain. Alfa Romeo looked very good as a whole. And I started looking at him in plus money. I think he was somewhere around plus 110.
Yep.
And I thought to myself, this could be a good bet. And then I dug into it more. And I start looking at it and thinking to myself, again, very different track. We're going to have very different performances this time around. I don't know if you're going to get as great of a performance from the AlphaTauris. I really don't. I think they performed well at Bahrain. I don't think that's going to happen here. And it's going to change around some of the order. I think Alpine's going to show much better in Saudi Arabia than they did. So I'm looking at Pierre Gasly and I'm looking at Ocon right now. Both are minus 125. I think if Gasly started 20th in that last race, if he has a good weekend leading into the race, he's a top 10 finish, and that minus 125 isn't going to be there. So that's what jumped out to me. Were you thinking along the same lines?
I was in for Gasly too. I like that. That was the one I'm going to put money on. I like where he's at before we even get to the qualification, because that number may move, and I kind of like where we're there. I also like Williams had a great race. I mean, it had a great race. Logan Sargent ran well. Albon was outstanding and got himself into the points. He got a point into 10th. So I like him, and he's got plus 250. And you're getting quite a bit back on your return, but I think it's worth a thought for him to get back in the top 10 and see if Williams is for real, or last week was just a great last race with great performance. But the car did look good. The drivers look good. Sargent his first year, but you mentioned I'm not betting Sargent being a rookie in this circuit, but Albon he's fared quite well last week. So I think plus 250 is somewhere I'm looking at with the Williamses.
Yeah, Williams was surprising because we're supposed to be of the belief, or at least we've been living in this world where you've got 3 and now 4 cars in the top echelon. And then we were supposed to have the mid-pack, and then we were supposed to have the back end. It doesn't look like we have a back end right now. It looks like we have 6 teams that are essentially in there trying to find their way. McLaren's towards the end, but like I said, once Baku comes, that car's going to surge. Williams is intriguing because they and AlphaTauri were roughly considered to be the 2 worst, but they showed okay in that last race. So I think that's where recency bias could hurt us. I think Alpine's a buy low right now. I think Williams might be a sell high, but if they put on a good showing this weekend, we're going to have to reassess for the 3rd race.
Let's go big picture with some of the futures now. We talked about it before in our first show. Verstappen was minus 120 pre-testing. After testing goes to minus 165. This is to win the whole championship, excuse me. Minus 220 before the actual race. Now here we are, and he's minus 360. Like this is beyond playing juice. Is it any worth placing a massive bet and getting pennies on the dollar back here?
So it's a fascinating question because on one hand, ask yourself this, like some people really shy away from big numbers like minus 360, minus 500. I'd never want to take that risk. Well, if you find out, like we see sometimes in MVP voting right before, Patrick Mahomes is about to win the award, if you know it's going to move to minus 1,600, wouldn't you really want that minus 360 when you can have it? So just because it's a big number doesn't mean you're not still going to beat the move. On the other hand, or at least in the same vein, ask yourself this. I mean, Red Bull right now, two very competent drivers. The car's in great shape. Everything seems to be running smoothly. Who's legitimately there to challenge them? Who's legitimately there to challenge Verstappen? Like, Ferrari is having reliability issues again. Maybe we don't overreact to that, but we have to note it based on what we saw last year. Mercedes is all but telling you they can't compete. And while Aston Martin looks good, looks improved, they don't look like they're going to be in the fight week in, week out. So minus 360, I don't think is the end of the world to lay that with Verstappen. I really don't. But I can understand if you want to hold back because of how far that's jumped after just one race.
Exactly. It's been 2 weeks. It went from minus 120 to minus 360. All right. Along those lines, Fernando Alonso, you just touched on Aston Martin. Obviously, great start. Hits the podium, 28-1. Pre-Bahrain, he's now 10-1 to win the whole thing. Is this worth any play? Given everything you just said, is it worth anything?
No. And the thing is, we played him 28-1. We talked about it the first time we got together and had one of these conversations. If you're going to take a long shot, that's a guy with upside. That upside's no longer gone. Right? If we go back 2 weeks and you're offering me 10-1 on Alonso, I'm saying no way. Now you're offering it after one race in which, again, it required Leclerc's car to fail in order for him to take the podium. Like, if the Ferrari doesn't blow up on Leclerc, then Alonso's not on the podium. And what are we talking about right here? He's definitely not 10-1. So this has been an overcorrection. It's a great story, but that was a phenomenal scenario for Alonso and Aston Martin, and it still only resulted in a distant third. Think about that when you're thinking about laying 10-1.
Let's run through a couple of these other ones too, because I totally agree with you. Leclerc and Sainz. Leclerc went from 450 to 12-1. Sainz 18-1 to 35-1. Does this say more about Ferrari in that week one, or does it just say that Max is dominant and we're going to adjust accordingly? Like, what do you read into those kind of big swings there?
Both factor in. I think it's more the issues with Ferrari. If Ferrari didn't have the Leclerc issue, then I think we'd still have a more competitive pricing. But with that car dying, and now we're talking about a 10-grid penalty this weekend, I think the mindset has to be that they have not solved the reliability issues from last year. And as a result, that's going to be what distances itself. I wouldn't be betting Carlos Sainz to win the fight with Verstappen if you wanted to get involved, because at some point, if the cars are on par, it's Leclerc who's going to get the benefit of the doubt in every single race, even though Sainz is ahead. So you could look to Leclerc, but again, with the 10-grid penalty, why not just wait until after this weekend to see how things reassess? I can't imagine the odds are going to get too much worse after this weekend, right? Like, you might distance it a little bit, but jumping the gun now and having a scenario that's a complete disaster, you're just costing yourself, I think, in the long run.
From a constructor standpoint, Red Bull was minus 150. They're now minus 450 to win the constructors. Ferrari 330 plus 330 to 7-1. Mercedes plus 250 to plus 750. Aston Martin 65-1 to 14-1. Are we just kind of repackaging a similar conversation? Like, there's still no value in betting anything else, I wouldn't say. But at minus 450, is it the same conversation you just had with minus 360 as relates to Max?
Essentially, right? Like, that's essentially what we see happening. I mean, Checo, let's just look at the number twos. Eliminate all the number ones from the equation. How many number twos are better than Sergio Perez right now, given the situation of the cars, the teammates, and everything else that's there? I mean, George Russell's a phenomenal driver, but he's in a car he admits can't compete. Carlos Sainz is a brilliant driver at times, but he's off to another slow start. He didn't drive a great race in Bahrain. And then if you look at any other, I mean, Lance Stroll is still coming off 2 broken wrists and a broken toe. And this track is really going to test him this week. Ultimately, when you're talking about the constructors, it's a similar situation in terms of pricing. It's elaborate, but who's the team that's going to find a way past them? Because if the number ones can't get past Verstappen, you're going to need a number 2 who could compete. Like, that was always the thought last season, where maybe Verstappen edges out Lewis, but George Russell could be better than Sergio Perez, right? I don't see any of that happening this year. I think Checo is the best of the number 2s, given the car he's in, given the team he's driving for.
Yeah, it's all the resources. It's everything. It's the team. It's the car, and it is the driver. But you have all those things that they are superior to everybody else's number 2. And I will say this too: there's no disorganization. There's no question about that. And I do think within Ferrari, still Sainz thinks he wants to be the number 1, and we've seen that play out last year within a course of a race. So, like, team orders does not exist as a question with Max and Checo, much to Checo's chagrin. It just is what it is. Right. And Lewis and Russell, we may find that be an issue through the course of this year, that Russell wants to be the man, and if Lewis is bummed because his car's not any good. You know, he may not. It could be an issue with that team as well. Alonso's going to be that guy for them. I don't think Lance Stroll is going to try to other than hitting his teammate the first race. I don't think he's really going to try to challenge him in some regard. At least I could be wrong there. But Max, and that order and team orders and how that group is all organized, the clarity I think is important. There's value in that.
Yeah, there is. Absolutely. If we had a team that at least looked like they were slightly off the pace, but they were competent, they were right there in Bahrain, we'd be having a very different conversation. Mm-hmm. But it was such thorough domination. Find me the weakness in Red Bull right now. You can't. That's what's scary on one end. Okay, so then find me another team that has almost no weaknesses. And again, you can't find that either. You've got a Mercedes team that's telling you outright they can't compete. You got a Ferrari team that we all believed was going to be there, but the same issues from last season are creeping up. And Aston Martin is a team we want to believe in, but they're still probably another step away. Alonso had to run a brilliant race just to get on the podium behind both of the Red Bulls. McLaren, a few years ago, they looked like they were coming up. They're distant. So right now, we talk about the head of the pack, but we need to be keeping our eyes on the midfield and how we can exploit that with gambling. And when a lot of these matchups come out, and you and I will be tweeting about them Saturday night, Sunday morning, what head-to-heads we like, that's where there's going to be value for us to make some money on all of this. To find the teams that are overvalued. Like I said, I think Alpine's going to be undervalued coming into this weekend. I think you might have a situation where Williams or AlphaTauri, based on what we saw, they're overvalued. That's where we're going to strike. At the top of the order, it feels like everything's set, and there's no reason for us to believe anything on a big picture basis is going to change as of now. It's a race-by-race basis. Maybe Ferrari takes advantage of some opportunity this weekend. That's why we're talking about Sainz at 16-1. But overall, big picture, it's kind of a holding pattern. You know, wait until something happens and maybe we see some value change, because it's pretty well set after one race, and there's not much of a reason to believe it's going to change drastically in the next couple weeks.
Very well said, but as you mentioned, the value can be found in that midfield, the head-to-heads. There's going to be ways to enjoy the race. If Max is 38 seconds ahead again, but you're still looking to have somebody win in the midfield and you got money on it, that's what makes it fun. Joe, great stuff, my man, and we will see you before Australia. But let's enjoy the race this weekend. Thanks, man.